Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilmU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu. What's up, Sixers fans? This is the Sixers Talk podcast presented to you by Wilmington University. WilmU works. I'm Ben Berry. No Danny Palmels today, so it's just me and Noah Levick. You can follow him on Twitter at Noah Levick, NBC Sports Philadelphia's own. Noah, how you doing today, my man?
Hey, man, I'm doing all right. Always some adrenaline pumping after night one of free agency. Not quite like the playoffs in a packed Miami arena, but there's an awareness that the action is high stakes and there's a lot of news swirling about. So I think I'm still running on that high a little bit this morning.
Well, just thought that you were in Miami and me and Danny was just still here in Philly, which we love. Glad to be here. It's home. I love it. But, you got to travel. You got to get some little sun, hang out on a little South Beach. Miami Beach got a little tan probably. So thank you for reminding me. I wasn't jealous at all.
I think for me, it was more sunburn and I don't know. Yeah, if I was partaking in the stereotypical pleasures of Miami, more locked into the playoff series. But no, was sincerely grateful to be there and get to cover it for the Sixers. Obviously, it did not go especially well for the team, but cool experience. And as we will get into, one of the key players in that series is set to head to Philadelphia.
We'll get right to that. Speaking of sunburn, thank you for everyone that rocked out with Danny Palmels and Cliff Augustine from SiriusXM on Wednesday on our last podcast. I was busy with writing. It was my birthday, so I was down at the beach. I think I might have got a little sunburn on my shoulder blades, but back to the sunburn. PJ Tucker, arguably the worst kept secret of this offseason of free agent signing, has joined the Philadelphia 76ers. 3 years, about $33 million. Big move. When the season ended, I said the Sixers needed some toughness. I said they needed an adult in the locker room to hold other people accountable. I think they have that. PJ played in Houston before Miami and went in a ring with the Bucks, so he knows James Harden. He knows Daryl Morey. He knows them very well. I think he can hold the other guys in the locker room accountable. What were your takes, Noah?
I think I agree with all those points. Obviously, one of the first things that comes to mind is after the Sixers were eliminated by Miami, Joel Embiid was specifically asked, would he like to see the team improve in the toughness department? And he went on an extended answer in which he essentially said that toughness and PJ Tucker are one and the same. And look, it's hard to argue, I think, just in terms of relentless effort, no one is better there than PJ Tucker. You watch him over the course of a game and he just does not take possessions off. And I think that is somewhat contagious. And there's a reason that playoff teams and teams with championship aspirations love him and want him aboard. I think on the court, the most appealing qualities here are the versatility. We know he can guard fives and has done it for Daryl Morey in Houston, but just really any star scorer, he's up for the challenge. We remember the matchup with Kevin Durant in that Bucks versus Nets series, and Tucker was just undeterred, and that's kind of his MO, and I think is valuable in ways that the box score statistics are not going to reflect. And I also just think he's a bit underrated as a passer and a playmaker, and that is nice on a team that's got two high usage stars in Embiid and Harden, and is going to need some safety valves and guys who, when Harden's double team, Tucker gets the ball at top of the key or maybe, runs some DHOs and can make something decent happen for the team from a decision-making standpoint. And was encouraging there this year when Bam Adebayo was sidelined after thumb surgery. So those were some of the initial positives that came to mind for me. And then I think the obvious concerns are he's 37 years old, and sure, he's got this durable reputation, but 37 outside of the NBA is not the same as within it. It's just not common for players that age to have sustained health. And I think with Tucker, perhaps he's got a better shot at it because he takes care of himself and takes pride in being available for his team. But this guy plays so hard and has done so for many years. And I think it's fair enough if you're worried whether he's going to be on the court, consistently throughout the duration of this contract.
That's a great point. That's what I was going to get to. PJ Tucker, he played 71 games last year for the Miami Heat. So he is durable, but he's also 37. And I was thinking maybe because 6 of his first 7 years playing pro ball were overseas, because played that first year, I think maybe in Toronto. I can't remember. Yes, his rookie year was in Toronto. Then he played overseas, Ukraine, Israel, things like that. But he still played basketball at a professional level. So that wear and tear is on his body. And it's something I've talked about Kevin Durant and James Harden, LeBron James. Like, these guys are older. We got to stop thinking of them as their mid to late 20s guys. They're in their mid to late 30s now and approaching it. And although LeBron James is still playing great, he's definitely not what he was like 10 years ago or even 5. So, like, that is something to think about when it comes to PJ Tucker. Yes, he takes care of his body. But it's something to think about. And maybe the Sixers are just rolling the dice that, hey, this is when now. He will hold other players accountable. He will play hard. And I like what he brings on the court as well. He's not a high volume scorer by any means, but the toughness, about 7.5 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game. But he shot from beyond the arc last year at 41%, and I think that went up to 45 in the playoffs. So I'm a big fan of the PJ Tucker signing. I'm going to try to be optimistic when it comes to health. Hopefully the injury bug that has bitten so many Sixers in the past 10 years doesn't bite him, because that will be a big loss. A question I have for you, Noah, how would that work with Tobias Harris? Does this mean anything for Tobias Harris here? Does that mean anything for Tobias Harris's future here in Philly, or will they have 2 power forwards out there on the court at the same time? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it necessarily, signifies that Tobias Harris is moving elsewhere or anything along those lines. I think, look, we understand and have for a while that though Harris is a very good NBA player, his production does not align with the contract, and that presents inherent difficulties in terms of looking to find a decent trade for him. So we remember, of course, when the Sixers picked up Al Horford, that slid Harris down to the 3, and that didn't go so great. I do think he has improved defensively since then. You look, for instance, at the defense on Pascal Siakam in the Raptors series, and I think with Harris, you probably should be more optimistic about his ability to consistently guard small forwards well. And there were even a few instances last season where he was impressive on shooting guards, point guards. That memorable stop in overtime against Gary Trent Jr. in the Raptors series, really impressive. When he asked to take the Darius Garland assignment in a game where Garland was crushing the Sixers and handled that quite nicely. But sure, the fit is perhaps not super intuitive. I think just Tucker in general, it's not too sunny way to frame it that he just enhances your versatility across the board. He can pretty much guard all positions defensively, and I think that allows you to mix and match a little bit better. And I also think with Tobias Harris, you probably shouldn't feel it super necessary to work around matchups for him. I think if anything, your confidence should be a little bit higher that he can handle star wings, and perhaps the Sixers will ask him to do that. And of course, they've just upgraded their perimeter defense overall, traded for D'Anthony Melton on draft night as well. And as we'll get into, Danuel House is another wing defender now in the mix here. So, yeah, look, I don't think the Tucker fit is inherently perfect basketball-wise. He is not a perfect player. He is not a star. But I do think if the idea is versatility and the idea is just allowing other players to be in good spots, Harris included, it's a thumbs up for me with PJ Tucker being on your basketball team.
So you just talked about some of the other additions. Danuel House Jr., another former Houston Rocket, might as well be the Philadelphia Rockets, but it's worse things they could have called us Philadelphia, I don't know, Kings or something like that. We don't want that. Danuel House Jr., 3-and-D guy, a big guard, 6'6", shot well from beyond the arc, spent some time last year in Utah. What can you tell us about House?
Yeah, his honestly one sustained stretch of NBA success was with the Rockets, but he was impressive there. Houston native, and he's the ultimate journeyman. He played at 2 colleges, played for the Delaware 87ers back in the day, played for a couple of G League teams, and has bounced around a bit, again, outside of that stint with the Rockets. I've always personally been a fan of his game. You recall he was one of the wings we mentioned, might be a fit here a while back. 3-and-D, as you said, and likes to play in transition, good athlete, high energy defender. And I think he's a bit different from like a Furkan Korkmaz in that when the catch and shoot opportunity isn't there, as opposed to Korkmaz where it's pump fake and then perhaps shoot again from 3. House likes to slash a little bit and has shown some capacity to do that pretty well. But just, is he like the most reliable player in the world? No, I don't think the track record suggests that, but he's shown that he's the kind of player who fits nicely amongst our talent rather, and he's up for any challenge, and he plays super hard and is tough. And of course, these are all things the Sixers were seeking and happened to be able to find in a former teammate of Harden, a former Morey guy in Houston. We alluded to it briefly when we touched on House in our free agency preview. There was the incident in the bubble where he was a key rotation guy for the Rockets, and then an NBA investigation found he had an unauthorized guest in his hotel room. And unfortunately for House, unfortunately for Houston, he left the bubble, and they ultimately lost that second round series against the Lakers. But did well for himself in Utah, earned a spot in that rotation last year, and now he will be teaming up with James Harden again.
I like House, big, versatile player, two-way player, something we've mentioned before in this podcast that the Sixers need. Shot 41% from beyond the arc, so I'm a big fan of that. The last podcast you and I weren't on, Danny and Cliff did about Harden opting out of his deal. And I know it's been negotiations. The Sixers have been talking to Harden, and as everything that's saying, he's staying here in Philadelphia. Do you have any insight what that contract could look like?
Yeah, so just like doing the math, we know what it can't be in year one, right? So Harden, by not opting in, enabled the Sixers to use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception on Tucker, the biannual exception on Danuel House. So you figure the year one figure is going to be somewhere in the mid-30s. And then I guess the question that we're still waiting on is just what does the rest of that contract actually look like? And yeah, I don't think we've got any firm answers there quite yet. But the expectation is, we'll get those figures soon and figure out exactly what the deal is with Harden. I think, the reporting from reputable folks has been that this is not going to be a super lengthy, 4 or 5 year sort of agreement. But of course that he's going to be in Philadelphia beyond just the half season, as everyone has indicated since they, nabbed him in February.
I'm thinking something along 2 to 4 years, 4 years being most. He's definitely going to want something more than a year, around 30, between 30 and like 38 million. In a previous podcast, I thought Chris Paul's deal, that 4-year, 120 million contract in Phoenix, was a good parameter that the Sixers should look at, as well as Harden. And the Suns, you saw they went undefeated in the bubble. They added Chris Paul. They went to the NBA Finals, won in the first 2 games. I'm not saying that's going to happen if Harden stays here in Philly and when he signs his new contract. I just think having Harden definitely makes the Sixers better, no matter how any of us feel about him and his effort. I think that contract with Chris Paul would be the best parameters just to set up a contract with a aging all-star, still a high-level player moving forward.
That was a great call from you earlier this offseason. It's looking more and more likely that it will be in that ballpark. I think, regardless of what the Sixers did in free agency, the reality was much of next season was going to hinge on what version of James Harden took the floor. So what are these offseason workouts going to yield? And is his optimism about, okay, I wasn't able to, play full court and do a lot of basketball stuff, and therefore, the opportunity to have a normal offseason will be beneficial. Is all of that actually going to come to fruition with results and with a more explosive version of James Harden and all of that? And I think, all those are extremely important, lingering questions. But, I do think he deserves legit credit for not just making the easy decision of, I'll take that $47 million. Of course, there are other perspectives, one could take here. You could say, sure, but, the extension and guaranteeing himself decent money beyond this year is good for him financially. But look, clearly he is genuinely team-oriented, and at 32 years old is desperate to not be one of those all-time great players who never won a title. He wants to give the Sixers the ability to pick up, quality depth. And I think the bottom line, he did that by declining this options. And that's not, a no-brainer. That's not something every single superstar would do.
Speaking of all-time great players that never won a ring, a couple weeks, me, Danny, and Noah will have a pod for you guys talk about greatest players to never win a ring, ranking them. It was a good conversation back and forth. We'll have that for you in a few weeks. Back to Harden. And something you said, like him being team-oriented. And I've heard for the past couple of years that Harden only cares about money. He doesn't care about winning. And I don't think that's true. Maybe he isn't the big rah-rah guy on the sidelines. Maybe he doesn't do everything that people would ideally like to see from a guy. But I definitely think he cares about winning. When he was in Houston, when he asked for the trade, Houston offered it was like 2 years or 3 years, like average salary being $50 million a year, like insane. If all he cared about money, he would have just stayed in Houston, who was a team falling apart, and we saw it run its course and accepted the money. He wanted to go to Philly or Brooklyn because he saw those teams as potential championship contenders. He went to Brooklyn. You saw that team had a lot of potential. He was happy. The first images that popped up when he first got there, big smile on his face, and it didn't work out. And we'll touch on what's happening in Brooklyn at the end of the pod, but that started to become a sinking ship, and he wanted to go somewhere to win. I think, although I can critique his games, the effort, the defense, Harden wants to win. I don't think that's up for debate. Maybe how he goes about it, or you might be able to critique his efforts and things like that. But I definitely think he wants to win, and him taking opting out to take less money is another proof of evidence that James Harden wants to win a championship.
Definitely, it was wild just in this kind of big picture, thoughts piece I did after night one of free agency, just writing like the last and only time James Harden has been in the finals. He was a 22-year-old sixth man, and that was a decade ago. And just think of like his legacy and his place in history. Even if he's not the guy scoring 40 points every night, if he's on a championship team and he performs really well in the playoffs, I think he skyrockets up many people's all-time lists, and I think he's aware of that. But I think also just many of these guys, like you have the choice of playing on a team where you're day-to-day environment is pleasant and you enjoy the company of your teammates, or a different situation that's perhaps more unstable, they prefer the one where they like the guys going to battle with them. And I think James Harden's in that spot. And I think Daryl Morey has, again, shown that he cares about his stars getting what they want. Something that came to mind for me last night was the 2020 offseason. Joel Embiid was pretty candid at that training camp about, he told the front office, we need more shooting. Daryl Morey made the trades on draft night for Seth Curry and Danny Green. He didn't, go quite as far as saying we need PJ Tucker, but he came awfully close after the Game 6 loss. And then, of course, we've got these players with connections to Harden who have started games next to him before. And Morey, again, has shown that he wants the superstars to be happy. And, of course, these particular role players do, at least on paper, seem like ones who, basketball-wise, should fit nicely both next to the stars and some of these other pieces on the Sixers as well.
Speaking of role players, speaking of shooting, another former Houston Rocket that's been linked to the Sixers among trade rumors. We talked about him on the pod before. He's a veteran. He's a little old. He will cost a lot of money, $19-20 million a year, I believe. Eric Gordon, still in Houston. What do you make of the rumors? What do you think he would add to the Sixers, the veteran Eric Gordon?
Yeah, I think the Sixers' offseason additions thus far have slanted a little heavier toward defense, right? They haven't really supplemented the shot making and the three-point shooting a ton, although, as you mentioned, Tucker and House had, strong years last year from three. Gordon, clearly, despite the relatively advanced age, can still do those things pretty well. Yet another guy who shot over 40% from three last year and, of course, knows all about playing with James Harden and how to complement a star in that way. I think my injury concerns with him would actually perhaps be a bit higher than Tucker, at least if we're looking narrowly at the next year or two. Just back-to-back years with groin injuries, and that gives me some pause, especially given that the contract is heftier, as you said, little under $20 million in year one, and then non-guaranteed for year two. But yeah, of course, it makes sense that Daryl Morey would have interest and want to explore the option. I just think we know Morey, perhaps more than any other executive, just hates the idea of losing trades.
Right.
And it's difficult for me, admittedly, as a relatively uncreative, guy without executive experience, to find deals that, land the Sixers Eric Gordon, and you come away thinking, oh man, the Sixers crushed that. But maybe Morey will find one. I definitely don't think he strikes me as like a necessity for this team or that they'll be hopeless without him. But I can understand that in terms of like players who can make shots and provide a little perimeter scoring outside of Harden, you might want to do a little bit more there, and Gordon might be an avenue for that.
That's why I was a fan of this Eric Gordon idea. A guy that can make open shots, create on his own, set others up as well. But the injury concern, Eric Gordon hasn't played more than 60 games in the season since 2018-2019 season. Put that into perspective. That was Dirk Nowitzki's last year in the league, right? So it's been some time.
Yeah.
So although he shoots beyond 40% from three, it would, with how much he would cost and what the Sixers might have to give up, I don't love the idea. I would be a fan of him being on the team, but I'm just not sure what they would give up. And it's not a guarantee that he's going to be on the court for even 50% of the games because of his injury history. He's only played more than 70 games in the season twice. That's not great. So in wear and tear, he's 34 years old, I believe. So he's up there with age, the injury history, the hamstrings. I like the idea, but I don't think it's not a necessity. It's not like the Sixers are Eric Gordon away from winning a championship. So if Daryl Morey could to stand pat, which most likely will happen because you said he likes to win trades, if he gets to stand pat and hold to see if they can get him at a cheaper price somehow, maybe the Rockets buy him out and the Sixers can get him on a low cost deal, but 19, 20 million for a guy that might play 30 to 40 games isn't ideal for where the Sixers are right now, in my opinion.
Absolutely right. I think just with all these trades, it's not in a vacuum. You have to give something up to get the player. And that's the bottom line of why this might not happen and why it might not be the best move in the world for the Sixers were it to happen. But yeah, it's going to be really intriguing to see how they head into opening night. And to me, whether the guard and wing rotation stays the same or close to what it is now, they knew they had to make up for losing Danny Green. They did, pick up House. But as I said, this is not a player like Green where you can be 100% sure what you're getting and whether he's going to, be a positive impact guy in the playoffs. And then, of course, your other two conventional wings on the roster right now are Matisse Thybulle and Furkan Korkmaz, neither of whom would be described as two-way players by, most in the NBA universe. So to me, that stands out as an area of uncertainty. And I'm curious, how they address that. But I think overall, the Sixers are more versatile and they are more, sturdy and just tough to play against on paper compared to where they entered this offseason.
I agree. And speaking of just the craziness that is free agency, we are a day in, and Jalen Brunson, Knicks, also a free agent signing that wasn't surprising. It was a terrible kept secret. What's been the biggest signing so far that just caught your eye, whether shocking or unshocking? What's some of the moves and deals that's caught your eye so far?
Yeah, Brunson would be up there. Just the degree speculation about it was fascinating to me. I'm intrigued how the NBA is going to handle potentially penalizing teams who did some work before that 6 p.m. Eastern deadline. You recall this year's NBA draft, there were only 58 picks because some teams were found to have broken the rules, and I would not be shocked if that's the case again. I was curious where Andre Drummond would end up. He's apparently progressing toward a deal with the Chicago Bulls. And I'm interested to see how he does there. Tony Bradley's also still on that team, another former Sixer. They needed some backup big help, and Drummond has a bit of a raise compared to last year. This deal is apparently 2 years, $6.6 million, so more than the minimum the Sixers offered him last season. It just feels like we're in a place with NBA reporting where so much of this leaks out before that we don't tend to be stunned. Obviously, we haven't mentioned it, but the major NBA story yesterday was Kevin Durant requested a trade from the Brooklyn Nets, and we are all waiting and seeing exactly how that pans out and where he and Kyrie Irving begin next season. The Athletic reported that Ben Simmons is expected to remain with the Brooklyn Nets. So we at least have some clarity there, but the entire league, I think, feels a bit in flux, given this massive news about one of the all-time greats apparently wanting to play elsewhere with 4 seasons left on his contract. I'm curious just whether the Suns would have enough to convince Brooklyn if Devin Booker is indeed not on the table. And then apparently the Miami Heat were also on Durant's wish list. So I don't even know what to make of that. That was honestly a bit mind blowing to me. But those are kind of some of my initial thoughts on it. How about you?
Andre Drummond, I was hoping the Sixers could get him on like the vet minimum. I was hoping he could come back on the vet minimum. It's not happening. But, if you don't hope, if you don't think it's not going to happen. UFC fighter Luke Rocco, what is it? Think, believe, achieve, or something like that. I just remember Michael Bisping like laughing about it when he knocked him out. Great times. Andre Drummond, that was, I was hoping the Sixers get him. The Jalen Brunson was terribly kept secret. John Wall being bought out by the Rockets and going to the Clippers. The Clippers haven't had a point guard a quality point guard since Kawhi Leonard and Paul George has gotten there. I don't know how much John Wall has in the tank. I would like to think a lot since he hasn't really played in the last 4 or 5 years. I remember seeing a stat this past season that Dirk Nowitzki has played more regular season games than John Wall in the past 5 seasons. So, and Dirk Nowitzki is, again, his last season was 18-19. So that caught my eye. I was going to wait to get to the Kevin Durant Kyrie thing because that's just bonkers. There was no way Russell Westbrook was opting out of that massive $47 million contract. It's just, no, I don't care how unhappy someone is. Most likely they're not opting out unless they have a chance to win somewhere. Bradley Beal staying in with the Wizards, they're maxing him out. Was it 5 years for $251 million? And I know a couple years ago it was like get Brad out of Washington so he can play somewhere relevant. He signed a max to stay. He's signing another max. And maybe he really likes it there. Maybe his family likes it in D.C. I used to live in D.C. for 4 years. I enjoyed it. And I'm not saying winning doesn't matter to him. Maybe he just wants to win in D.C. But that was just something to think about. If maybe he's not as miserable as we all perceive he is for them not winning. So that was another thing that caught my eye. The Bobby Portis, Joe Ingles in Milwaukee, Ja getting hit a max rookie extension. The first couple of days free agency, Joker, Booker, Cat all getting contracts, max contracts, super max for them. Just a big first day of free agency, and we talked about before the pod. Seemed like it was busier definitely than last year, maybe the last couple. Now to the Nets. The Kevin Durant thing was surprising, especially after Kyrie Irving opted in for his player option. Kevin Durant has 4 years left on his deal. I don't know how much power he has, but we just saw Ben Simmons get out of Philadelphia this past season. I assume the Nets will get a monster haul for Kevin Durant. I've seen trade proposals from reporters and insiders from the Heat, and they practically gut their roster. Bam Adebayo, Gabe Vincent, Max Strus. I saw the Phoenix that would be in KD's like number one option. If Booker's not involved, I think maybe they can do like a sign and trade with Ayton, because that relationship seemed all but burnt to the ground when they got eliminated from the playoffs. But I'm not sure. I don't think that will work all that great. Ayton and Ben Simmons with the Nets. Not saying Ayton is Joel Embiid, but I mean similar styles of play. I don't even think Ayton has an outside shot, so I don't know how that will work. It was rumors that the Lakers will go after both of them. I don't know what's going to happen there. It's just when those notifications came up, I just said, wow. I think I'm rooting for chaos because, as you know, I like chaos. I would like to see Kyrie back with LeBron in LA just to see what happens there. Kyrie and James Harden having to work together again would be comical in my eyes. Watching Popovich or Spoelstra and Pat Riley having to deal with Kyrie would be funny. I have no idea what's going to happen, but NBA offseason is back. Twitter's going wild. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is a good league to follow if you're a fan of chaos. And it just never fails to deliver. I guess, we're Sixers guys. It's fair to wonder, whether the Sixers might be able to put together a compelling offer. My gut feel is they would most likely be outbid by other teams here, but you can never rule out Daryl Morey. Obviously, this whole thing's been extraordinarily unpredictable, and who knows? Tyrese Maxey, you figure, would be the cornerstone piece there, and theoretically, quite an attractive player to Brooklyn because not only is he young and full of potential, but has demonstrated that he's already quite good in the NBA. But I'm sure many teams have called and will continue to call Brooklyn with extremely strong offers, and I have absolutely no idea which they'd pick. I'd imagine Durant's preferences matter some here, that they would most likely want to find a destination that he's cool with, but I also understand their ultimate obligation is to do what's right for the future of the franchise, and we'll see how Sean Marks juggles that and pulls it off. Want to mention, just while we're covering all the news yesterday, we don't want to overlook that Brett Brown is back in coaching. He is joining the San Antonio Spurs staff with old friend Greg Popovich. Cool news. Brett Brown, I think regardless of what you think of him as a coach, everyone recognizes he's a good guy. Had been out of the coaching game for a couple of years, and now joining a Spurs franchise that clearly is a bit more developmentally slanted after trading away DeJounte Murray, and they've got a bunch of young players there, and Brett Brown is a player development guy who will have opportunities to work with Jeremy Sohan and Keldon Johnson, Josh Primo, players like that. So that'll be really neat to see. And it seems like the timing's good as well for Brett Brown, whose son has committed to play for the University of Pennsylvania. So he will be a Quaker next season, Sam Brown from Lower Merion. And Brett Brown will be joining up yet again with the Spurs on an NBA bench.
Good for Brett Brown. Congratulations to him on the new gig. No, before we get out of here, what you working on the website?
Yeah, so as I briefly mentioned, got sort of a big picture column on the night one moves, touching on just some thoughts on House's game and Morey demonstrating that he wants to cater to his stars' desires here with how he's approaching this offseason. We're just continuing to cover everything that happens here Sixers-wise, obviously waiting for news on that expected James Harden extension and what that'll look like, and we'll break all of that down. And then also coming up here, the Sixers will be playing basketball games somewhat soon in the Utah Summer League. I believe they're expected to have a mini camp ahead of that. So I will have coverage there, and excited to write about a little basketball in the not too distant future with players like Jaden Springer, Isaiah Joe, Julian Champagny, Michael Foster Jr., probably taking the court here in Summer League coming up pretty soon for the Sixers.
That's Noah Levick. You can follow him on Twitter at Noah Levick. All his great work at NBC Sports Philadelphia. I'm Ben Berry. Thank you for listening to the latest Sixers Talk podcast presented to you by Wilmington University. Wilm, you worked. We'll be back with you with a new podcast early next week after the 4th. Happy July 4th. Enjoy your time off with family and friends, hopefully cooking out. And give us a 5-star review. Leave your comments in the comments section if you're checking us out on YouTube. We'll see you next time.